Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to American History Gazette. I've just touched down in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. We're going to be here for 5 days visiting all the historic sites, all the landmarks, all the memorials, all the museums. We're going to be touring the White House. We're going to be touring Arlington National Cemetery. So we're going to split it up into a couple different videos. This video is going to focus on the National Mall and all the memorials, such as the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial. And we're gonna have a separate video for the White House tour, separate video for the Arlington tour, and maybe a separate video for the museum tour. But today we're walking around the National Mall. We're gonna visit all the memorials and show you all the sights to see. And of course, talk about some history. But first up is the Jefferson Memorial, which is one of my absolute favorites. So let's go check that out. Now, before we get to the Jefferson Memorial, there's a pretty interesting spot here about 200 yards away on the walk over, and this is the George Mason Memorial. George Mason was the author of the Bill of Rights, and at the front of the memorial, they refer to him as the forgotten founder, which I do think is applicable. He's obviously the author of the Bill of Rights, which is extremely important in American politics and American society, but he is largely forgotten from mainstream history books. You don't really hear about him that much, but there's a pretty cool statue of him, larger than life statue. I'll go stand next to him so you can see in scale. Definitely a pretty big statue, sitting here pondering the secrets of the universe, the philosophical secrets of American politics and American society. But definitely a pretty cool spot. They got a nice little fountain out here. You guys should definitely check it out if you're close by the Jefferson Memorial, which we are about to get to next. All right, y'all, we are at the steps of the Jefferson Memorial. It is grandiose, it is spectacular, it is beautiful, it is way bigger in person than you would think from looking at pictures. But across the way, across the tidal basin here, this little man-made pond, you have a beautiful view of the Washington Monument, which we will be checking out, but absolutely beautiful view. Let me give you guys a quick peek at that. Now, this is one of my probably favorite monuments or memorials throughout Washington, D.C., because Thomas Jefferson is a specifically important and impactful character to me. He is the author of the Declaration of Independence, which I made my first YouTube video on. My first YouTube video was a documentary made completely by me about the Declaration of Independence, and the words that he penned on that page, I can't even put into words how they make me feel, how important they are to me. I'm a very patriotic guy. I love America. I think America is the greatest country in the world because it is. And the founding of our country is specifically impactful to me. But the Jefferson Memorial, I think encapsulates his legacy pretty well. There's a lot of infamous quotes on the walls from Jefferson, specifically my favorite being his excerpt from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and it goes on. But I highly encourage you guys to come to Washington, D.C. at least once in your life, especially if you are an American. I think it's very important for us to see our nation's capital at least once in our life and really connect with the history and all of these monuments and the men and events that have shaped our nation and built the American identity and the American legacy. And of course, Jefferson was one of the most influential and impactful in doing so. It's difficult to put into words how important this stuff is to me. I hope I convey it, but definitely a very important and very cool spot to check out when you come to Washington, D.C. We are back here at the Washington Monument, standing firm and resolute in the middle of the city. Completed in 1884. It was actually the tallest structure in the world when it was completed, which is actually pretty cool. It wasn't until the Eiffel Tower in Paris that was surpassed. But this has got to be the most iconic thing in Washington, D.C. I mean, when I see this, I'm just filled with so much pride and patriotism of my country. I see this standing, rising above all of the other buildings, a symbol of America's strength. It's just a beautiful sight to see. Now, this monument, of course, honors the legacy of the father of our country, George Washington, our very first president. But I'm pretty interested to hear what he would think about this. Washington was a very humble guy, and now he's got our nation's capital named after him. He's got this giant monument. So I think it would be pretty funny to hear what he has to think because he was such a humble guy. I don't know if he'd be too happy about it, but nevertheless, this absolutely honors his legacy in a very magnificent way, and it's a beautiful monument here in Washington, D.C. You can take an elevator to the top. There's windows way up there. I don't know if you can see it, but there's little windows that you can look out of and take an elevator to the top, but it's pretty exclusive. You have to plan it like over a month in advance because they fill up fast. So that is pretty cool. It's on the bucket list. Definitely going to do that one day, but not this trip. All right, now we're at the World War II Museum, honoring all the men and women who fought and died during one of the largest conflicts in world history. There's a nice, beautiful little fountain where actually if you put your feet in, it is meant to honor the men and women who died in World War II. It is not disrespectful. You are allowed to put your feet in, but there's little pillars all around for all the states and territories representing the men and women from each state who fought in the conflict. And something interesting that I actually learned recently was my great-great-uncle was a private in World War II, and he earned the Silver Star for bravery and gallantry. I didn't know I had any ancestors who fought in World War II until quite recently, so that was really cool to find out. But World War II is one of my favorite aspects of American history. There's so many fascinating and inspiring and compelling stories that came from the conflict. You would probably know, just looking at my channel, this is my favorite because I have so many videos and podcast episodes about it, so I highly urge you guys to go check those out, especially the podcast episodes where I get best-selling authors on to talk about these amazing stories. It's really, really inspiring and compelling stuff. But this is the World War II Museum. On to the Lincoln Memorial. Now we're walking along the reflection pond here up to the Lincoln Memorial, reflecting on America's greatness. So here is the Lincoln Memorial. You just saw inside, or maybe you're about to see, I don't know yet. But this is the Lincoln Memorial. It is giant. I think it's way bigger in real life than it seems on pictures, a lot like everything else in this city. But obviously Lincoln, mostly regarded as one of the top 3 presidents in American history, known for his leadership throughout the Civil War, known for the emancipation of the slaves. They have his Gettysburg Address in there. They have an inaugural speech in there, and I think the Emancipation Proclamation, little excerpt from that. They got some speeches on the walls, but obviously his big giant statue. There is a little exhibit underneath that you can go to, but I think it's closed off right now. There's a lot of construction going on, unfortunately. And as you just saw, or you're about to see, I did stand in the exact same place that MLK gave his I Have a Dream speech to thousands of people standing out along the reflection pond and in the National Mall. Pretty powerful moment to look out through MLK's eyes and imagine what that would have been like. And also, of course, Forrest Gump gave his, spontaneous little speech here where he met Jenny and ran out into the reflection pond. Pretty cool little snippet of history. This is where MLK stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to give his I Have a Dream speech on August 28, 1963, during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And this is the view he would have had with thousands of people standing shoulder to shoulder. Now this that we're at right now is the Korean War Memorial. Quite a somber memorial. There's just a wall circling the entire memorial listed with names of those fallen. We have a nice fountain here remembering. And as you saw, we have those big giant statues of guys walking through probably snow and sleet and rain and cold, fighting for their country. It's pretty incredible what these guys went through to fight for freedom. Our generations today just don't understand the types of struggles that our ancestors went through, but it's great to visit these memorials, to be reminded, to reminisce, to think about it, to meditate on it, to reflect on it, and to appreciate what our ancestors have done for us. Right behind me is the Vietnam War Memorial, giant wall covered with names of those fallen in a very controversial war in American history. Many thought we shouldn't have been there. Many thought we got out too late, which we definitely did get out too late. Very drawn out conflict, but it's a very somber situation over there. Usually there's a lot of Vietnam veterans walking around searching for the names of their lost brothers. It's very sad, but when you come to DC and visit these monuments, it's important to not just be visiting landmarks and walking around and be all happy and jolly. Just really think about the history behind these monuments and why they're here and what happened, throughout history to build the American identity and shape our nation. It's very important to remember and reflect on these events and not just visit sites for the sake of visiting sites and crossing things off your bucket list. Actually think about the history behind these monuments, why they're here. One thing I do want to mention is towards the beginning of my podcast a couple months ago, I think it was episode 6, I did have a Vietnam veteran on the podcast, and that was quite a profound, interesting conversation. He had a lot to say on the lies and corruption behind the Vietnam War and all the deceit that went behind U.S. troops being there, and many men died unnecessarily, and we talked a lot about his experience, so I do highly urge you guys to go check that out. It's episode 6 on the podcast, so let's go to the podcast, you'll find it. Very interesting conversation. Now here is a very cool memorial that I haven't seen anyone talk about in any of their videos, but this is a little memorial on a nice little pond over by the Vietnam War Memorial to commemorate the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, my favorite document in American history. We saw the Jefferson Memorial yesterday. That'll be in this video. The man who drafted it, the man who wrote it. But it's really cool. They have all of the signatures, and then they say the name and their occupation and where they're from, all 56 of them. Here is Mr. Charles Carroll, the last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence. And if you remember, he had to pass his secret to a young Thomas Gates while he was dying to keep the secret going of the treasure that was found at the end of National Treasure. That secret being The Secret Lies with Charlotte. But Charles Carroll, the last surviving signer, and he is the one who kept the secret to pass it on to young Thomas Gates, like we saw in National Treasure, one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. Here's the man himself, Mr. Thomas Jefferson, the author of said document that all of these signers had to sign. Here's Mr. John Hancock, another worthy mention, known for having the largest signature on the document, so King George could see it without using his reading glasses, which is obviously a very well-known piece of history. Here we have the Adams cousins. Samuel Adams, a very passionate guy. Mr. John Adams, also another passionate guy, who would go on to become the second president of the United States. This is a statue of Nathan Hale, who is one of my favorite figures in American history. He was a spy during the American Revolution, who was hanged in 1776, and his last words on the gallows were, "My only regret is that I have but one life to give for my country." Here we are in Lafayette Square now. In the center is a statue of Andrew Jackson, the famous general from the War of 1812 and the 7th President of the United States. At each of the 4 corners are foreign allies who helped America during the Revolutionary War. This is Baron von Steuben, the Prussian general who trained the Continental Army at Valley Forge and turned them from a ragtag army into an effective fighting force. This is French Admiral Rochambeau, who helped blockade the British at Yorktown, allowing for General Washington to swoop in and defeat Cornwallis and the British Army, leading to their surrender. This is the Marquis de Lafayette, who provided invaluable military leadership and secured vital French support, which significantly contributed to the American victory in the Revolutionary War. This is Thaddeus Kosciuszko, a Polish general and military engineer who fought with the Americans during the Revolutionary War. This is a monument to Union General William Tecumseh Sherman, who is known for his March to the Sea, which aimed to cripple the Confederacy's capacity to wage war. Here is the Dwight Eisenhower Memorial. Eisenhower is one of my favorite presidents, known for leading the Allied forces in World War II and going on to serve as the 34th President of the United States. All right, y'all. I'm back home now from our 5-day Washington, D.C. Odyssey, and I realize I haven't made an outro for our monuments and memorials video. So that wraps up the video, guys. We got to see so many cool memorials and monuments in Washington, D.C. Obviously, the big ones, the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial. In the city, it seems that there's a statue or a monument of so many different people on every street corner. They're everywhere, from Einstein to Nathan Hale to George Washington, the father of our country. And it's amazing to see all of these memorials and connect with our shared history. It was an absolute blast to visit our nation's capital once again. This won't be the last time. I love Washington, D.C. I want to go during the winter. I've only been during the summer months. I want to go during the winter when it's snowing, especially going to Arlington when it's covered in snow would be so beautiful. And there would be less tourists. It's summer, so there was a lot of tourists going on. But that wraps up the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you did enjoy it. Make sure to check out our Patreon down in the description below if you want to support the channel. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on our next adventure.